Well, thank you very much for having such an honor middle of the day, getting into so many homes and people. It's my pleasure, first of all, to know Rabbi Gottsman in the previous few days personally, and putting so much effort into making it happen. At the same time, it's my pleasure to join so many people who are interested in halacha, and a little bit in Iyunim in halacha, more than just halacha. And to the nice part of it, also halacha l'maaseh at the end, which is always goes together. So, as we're running in the OU, the halacha and technology department, this is I think the challenge today, almost in any field, that the Rabbanim today needs to be at the same time doctors, professionals, technology experts. The world is getting, changes very fast. Meaning, I shouldn't say it's a new things, because all the Rabbanim at all the times, all the poskim try their best to get the knowledge in order to paskin. If you go in particular to our topic, when it goes to electricity and all of that, you can see all the way back to the Beis Yitzchok or the Orach HaShulchan. All of these poskim used to sit down with experts, and specifically later on of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Eretz Yisrael. And even here, there's a tshuva from Vayan Yosef from the Popper Roof, and he's presenting that they had a big meeting with Ken Edison at the time, going back 60 or 70 years ago. So it was a very common thing for the rabbis to ask for the technical advice, from the technical knowledge. The only difference is that things are getting changed today's much faster than many Rabbanim are able to catch. So therefore, in many fields, we need to constantly consult with the experts, whether it's in the medical field, whether in the technology field, whether in the kashrut field. All of them are being updated and changed constantly. So it's very important to know the metzius, to know the fact. Like the Go is Masber. He explains the Gemara. The Gemara says, Imri la chochma achoisiat, the Gemara in Kiddushin. And it says the Gemara, what I mean, Imri la chochma to the Torah achoisiat, the Torah, the learning should be like his sister. So the Gemara says two things. First of all, the same like you know your sister so well, you should know the Torah so well. And then says the Gemara, the same like it's so clear to you the halacha that you're not allowed to marry off your sister, same should be the rest of the Torah so clear to you. So they go and explain that it goes of these two things. When a Rav is going to pass on a shaila, he has to be crystal clear about the fact, exactly like he knows his sister. At the same time, he has to be crystal clear about the halacha, the same like he knows the halacha that you're not allowed to marry off his sister. So when these two things are getting together, you know the halacha and you know the facts, you know the metzius, then it's a possibility. Then it's chance, of course, with the tefillah to pass from the right psak. So we had a conversation back and forth what we want to cover, and actually in the technology world there's so much thing to cover. But I wanted to get a little bit into a specific conversation. But before that, I want to present the way I'm usually presenting these things, which I think makes it a little bit easier to understand. So going back to Brias Olam, right? When the world was created, and on the first hour of the night, the Adam Rishon put out a fire. So this fire was a real fire, and this fire was made by a real person. He took two stones and got fire out of it. This is very simple. This is fire. And we're reading in the Torah, we're talking about you're not allowed to turn out a fire on Shabbos. It means the minimum, at the minimum, it means such a fire. Not allowed to take two stones and create a fire. This is fire. The problem with today's generation is that this fire is almost not common. You can't even see it, you know. Where do you see fire today? You know, this is the most closest fire you can see today, right? Anything else, it's electricity. Anything else, you go in today in a kitchen, most of the fires are already covered. You don't see the fire. Some of them you're not even seeing the electricity. We're talking about, you know, induction cooktops. You're talking about microwaves. It's a different world. The fire is not the same fire. And the question is always, you know, is it the fire? Is it the fire that Torah was talking about, or not? Maybe, you know, it's something else, fire, something like that. You know, in Israel, they used to say over a joke, they used to say that there was two types of speakers in Israel. I don't know if you're familiar with Baal Tshuvas. One of them is a pretty famous one, is Rabbi Amnon Yitzchak. And the other one is Rav Neugershal. Rav Neugershal is more a logic person, you know, explain stuff. So Baal Tshuva one asked the two Rabbanim about a hot plate on Shabbos. I understand, you're not allowed to turn on a fire on Shabbos. But what's the problem with turning on a hot plate on Shabbos? I'm just plugging her in. You don't see anything. So they say, Rabbi Neugershal was getting into an old shiur explaining what is the method of fire, what is fire made of, is it the action, is it the results, back and forth. Old shiur that we're gonna actually discuss today soon. But Rabbi Amnon Yitzchak went over and says, you tell me, it's not a fire? Sit down on it. Let me see if it's not a fire. Sit down on it. So what we're trying to say is that sometimes you're able to communicate the message, sometimes you're able to understand just by seeing it, and sometimes not. So coming back from this original fire made out of stone, and then getting into matches, we also step on the way in history. And then we got into such fires. And then getting into electricity to begin with. And then electricity itself is a heat element. Sometimes you have a real heat element, whether in an oven, in your heating system. But then you're getting into electricity where there's no fire involved, like a compressor in your refrigerator or your air conditioning system. And then you go down even to computers, which are basically low voltage electricity. So when we're talking today about the survival, and again, I'm not really saying that there is considered fire. It could be that at a certain point it's not considered fire. It could be that real fire is fire. It could even be that a heat element is fire, like we know about the concept of gecheles and matches. The Gemara is talking about a coil, a metal coil that gets hot, red, and it considered fire. So the conversation should start whether a heat element today is getting into the same category or not. And then if we're going forward, if there's no fire involved, like any other electricity methods or even low voltage electricity method that's possible, it's not considered fire. So the first conversation is always to be, what are we talking about? Is what we're talking about is a fire? Is what we're talking about is a melocha de oraisa? Is what we're talking about is a melocha de rabbanon? What is it, a computer? What is it, a single? And this is what I guess, you know, Rabbi Gottsman probably covered a little bit in the modern, in the water meters, or some other shiurim that I saw you guys enjoyed in the previous few days. So this is one part of the conversation. So one part of the conversation is to identify and understand exactly what are we talking about. What are we doing? Are we turning on a fire? Are we doing a melocha? Are we being over for the rabbanon? What are we doing? So this is one part of the conversation, and this is something that needs to be investigated every time we get into every machinery and every new concept and new idea that's coming up. This is always question number one. What are we doing? Now, going forward, after we cover and we understand what are we doing, the next question is always going to be, okay, so we know what we are doing, we know the results of our action, but now the question will be, So how are we doing it? Which means in the same way. So go back to Adam HaRishon, right? So Adam HaRishon was turning his fire was an original fire, and the Adam, the person, was an original person, and he was doing it with an action. He was scratching together two stones, and he made a fire. So here we have a full picture. There was a fire, there was a person, and there was an action. Now we're going forward. So we are using a match to turn on a fire. Okay? Still, we have an action. We are causing two things together, and there's a fire. There's a fire coming out. We're doing it. Okay. And again, back to this one. I'm doing it. There's an action over here. So after we understand there's a fire over here, at the same time we understand there's an action over here. I'm doing it. Okay. But the world today is a totally different world, right? Going back to a switch. So we're not really turning on a fire anymore. We're not really dealing with the actual fire. Again, assuming it's going to be a fire. You know what I mean? Let's go back to even an oven with a regular gas range. So you have an actual fire coming out. Fine. The fire is a fire. But we're turning out with a knob. A knob is basically a traditional switch. So now what do you do when you're turning on a switch? You're putting together a circuit. You're putting together a circuit, so you allow the electron to flow. So once the electron flows, we're getting fire. So the question is that our action? Are you the one causing this fire? This question was a serious question. And of course, before we're going so far, so today, it's not even such a mechanical switch anymore. We have a computer switch. How about that? We have a digital connection, and we turn on the fire to a single. And then we can go forward, and we have sensors today, right? Sensor is basically a switch. The motion sensor means you have like two sensors, one's next to the other. You're walking to, so once these sensors are getting a message one after the other, okay, so there's a motion over here, the light is turning on. The camera is turning on, whatever it should be. So putting aside the question, what is it that turns on, and whether such lights and cameras and what's involved in that, is a different concept. What we're trying to cover now is, so is that your action? Are you the one doing it? We know that we have many other concepts when it comes to the action. So the terminology is a different terminology. When it comes to the results, what we discussed before, so the question is it a fire? Is it a malacha d'oraisa? Is it a malacha d'rabbanan? This is one terminology, one different conversation we want to talk about. But here today we're going to focus about the action. Am I doing it? Okay. So here, there's many other and different concepts in halacha. We have a dorasheinu mechaven, we have a psikresha, we have misasek, we have grammar. This is all around the action, whether I'm doing it or not. Am I mechaven to do it or not? Do I need it or not, or not? It's my action, it's my maise, or just a grammar. So this is what we're going to focus today. And in more particular, when we're getting into voice command. So again, like we said before, in the old time, we were using stones. We were using such stuff. But today, we're using a mechanical switch, which is already a conversation going back years ago. And then we got a digital switch. And then we got computer switch, sensors, motion sensors, and now we're talking about voice command. The world today is advanced enough for you just to speak. You know, in old times we know that the B'mamori Borei, Kadosh Baruch Hu Basar Mamori is Niro Ilam. You know, Kadosh Baruch Hu was able, Chas Shalom, I'm saying it as a joke, you know, not to compare Chas Shalom. But B'mamori Borei Shchokim. Today, with the dibur, you can speak and you don't have to do anything. It just goes all around. You have all these devices today. You have an Echo, Amazon is an Echo, Siri, Google, Hey Google, you know, all type of stuff that you're able to speak, and they are connected to the cloud service we're called, and you can do whatever you want. You can buy today's stuff. You can order a car service on Uber. You can get deliveries. You can connect switches in your house. You can do whatever you want. Everything is with a voice command. The voice command. The voice command. You can just say a word, and everyone is to you. There was a joke, I think, in one of the states in America, and they said the machine was on in the house, and you know there's like a wake word. So let's say Amazon is Alexa, Google is Siri, whatever. So he goes, the mother goes to the daughter and says, Alexa, can you go buy me a dollhouse? And the daughter's name was Alexa. But the machine automatically ordered a dollhouse on Amazon. So it became a joke. So it was on TV in this town just the following week. So the guy on TV is telling the story and says, you know what happened? The mother says, Alexa, can you buy me a dollhouse? So what happened was, in all the houses around where the TV was on, there was an echo machine over there too. So these machines were listening to Alexa, can you buy me a dollhouse? So all these houses got a dollhouse tomorrow, ordered by Amazon. So this is the world today, you know? You speak to people, you speak to machines, and the machine are doing for you even a better job than people. So the question is, again, when we're going to analyze, I was about 2 years ago, I was on the headline Aloha show by David Lichtenstein on Motzei Shabbos in the radio, and we were covering all the stuff. So the conversation was, so he was putting the conversation more on what's going on and what is it in this machine. You know, the machine is listening, the machine is getting the wake word, and then start recording, and then connect it to the cloud service, and then sending you back a message or whatever you ask for. So what are we doing? But at the same time, you have to understand, okay, so let's say we are causing a melacha, we can discuss separately, what are we doing exactly? But the question is, are we really doing it? Halachically, is the fact that we are speaking, is considered an action, is considered a pe'ula, a ma'aseh, or maybe not. Right? So this goes along with understanding the development of technology. So, for example, if you go back to the first question, aber Speser Frank in HaRav, he is dealing with the very first question. In his time, electric switch came up. So he was dealing whether it's a ma'aseh or not. And he's putting over here, if you look into the tshuva, and he's explaining how it works, he's talking about the electric flow. It was, you know, think about it, it was new stuff at that time. You know, like we're discussing now, internet and this stuff. At that time, you know, the electricity was the new stuff then. So the Speser Frank is already explaining his whole paragraph over here, explaining how the electrons goes back and forth and how it gets into the switch. But bottom line, he said, you're not turning on the fire, right? What are you doing? You're putting together the circuit so the electrons are flowing in. Okay? So interesting, and Speser is not really talking about Melech Shabbos. He's talking about Hadlokas Ner Shabbos. Okay? And he's talking over there, whether, famous question, right? You know, people are stuck in hotels, Kimpatun, you know, have babies in the hospital. Are you able to use electricity to turn on the light and be mekayim in the mitzvahs Hadlokas Ner Shabbos, right? So this is the question he was dealing with, and his question was around the fact that maybe we need an action. So Hadlokas Ner Shabbos, I'm sorry. We know there's a conversation in the Shabbos, you know, there's a Mogan Avoma, whether you're allowed to use a goy to turn your candle on if you're being called Shabbos already. There's all conversation whether you need a ma'aseh or not in Hadlokas Ner Shabbos. So taking the opinion that we need a ma'aseh in adlokas ner Shabbos, meaning it's not just enough you should have a light in your house of Shabbos, but you have to turn this on. So Beresh Paisach over here in the Tshuva says, Yesh lodun im yoytze yedechoivas adlokas ner shel Shabbos bechashmal. He says, I'm not sure. He says, lechoyer lechumro yesh letzaded the hadloka zo. To light the candles in such a way, she bore mitoch sivu v'kafto shebetoch hashalter. You just, at the time, it was basically like we have a knob. That's the way the switches was in that time. So maybe ein ze legroma. Okay. So, and he goes on into this conversation into adlokas ner Shabbos. So, of course, he was mesupek. And he was going lechumro when it comes to ner Shabbos. You understand what I'm saying? Meaning, he was being machmir that for Shabbos, it's not for ner Shabbos, it's not going to be enough to be a ma'aseh. But of course, that we have to be machmir to the other side. That for melecha Shabbos, we have to be choishes. It's considered to be a melecha. All I'm pointing out from this conversation is that when these transitions start happening about 70, 80, 100 years ago, when turning the fire was changing from using stones, matches, or even stuff like this, simple stuff, and it became really more like turning a switch and the light is over there, turning a knob and the fire is on the gas range. This is where the Talmidei Chachamim and the Rabbonim at that time they started the conversation, and the conversation was, is it a ma'aseh or not? Okay. So we got step number one, talking about the very original mechanical simple switch that there was already a debating, is it a ma'aseh or not? So the ma'aseh, don't get me wrong, Rav Speiser is only choishes the chumra for Hilchos ner Shabbos, and over there he's saying maybe it's not enough. It's not enough of a ma'aseh. And of course we have to be choishes the chumra the same way that for melecha Shabbos it's an issur. Okay, so we got step number one. There's another tshuva from Shlomo Zalman, the famous tshuva when you talk about the refrigerators. I think it's even Yud. Shlomo Zalman is dealing with the very beginning, the very first conversation of refrigerators. You know, when you talk to people on the street, especially today, you know, this is kind of my expertise, talking about refrigerators and ovens. So the idea of people is, okay, so I have to turn off the light. Okay. So first of all, we should know today's refrigerators, the light is one of the very, very simple and small questions. You know, we talk about LED lights. You know, we're not going to get into it whether LED is considered fire or not. It's a different conversation. In fact, the refrigerators, there's so many things to take care of, and what we actually do, with the OU and GE and all different companies taking care of the compressor, taking care of the defrost, taking care of the sensors of the temperature. And all of that stuff, that's a side note. But everyone knows the olive base. You have to take care of your light. Either you take off the bulb, you just take the switch. Today, so many of them doesn't have switches anymore. So you got to put a magnet, where the sensor is. But who knows that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, in his very beginning paragraph in the Tshuva, is dealing with this particular question, and he's asking himself whether closing the door on a switch, you understand, we're going already the next step. So we had already the switch. You're turning on the switch, you're turning over the knob of the oven. So Rabbi Speiser Frank, we got it already. This is at least the chumrah considered a ma'aseh. Now, Shlomo Zalman trying to understand, but now I'm not even turning the switch. Okay, I'm closing the door, so the door is touching the switch, and that's why the light goes off or the light goes on when I'm opening it back. So is that a ma'aseh? Shlomo Zalman was taking it to the next level. Is that considered a ma'aseh? Don't take it for granted. We know, of course, you have to take care of it. But Rav Shlomo Zalman, for him, and just go back in the perspective at that time, it was like something new. Hey, you're not even touching the switch. You're not even turning on the switch by pressing the button. You're just closing the door, and the door is touching the switch, and it turns on the light. So is that a Maisa? Okay. So Shlomo Zalman goes on and says, yes, if that's a derech, and that's the way it happens, and it happens right away. So Shlomo Zalman is clearly ruling over there that this is considered a Maisa. But what I'm trying to take from this tshuva is just to get into the mind of the poskim at that time, and walk through the stages to understand where we're getting to. So we walked to the stage of turning on a fire to 2 stones. We went over to matches, and we're going forward to a switch. And now we already covered the door of the fridge is turning on the switch. Shlomo Zalman is ruling, yes, it's considered a Maisa because it's happening right away. You're doing it, even though it seems complicated to you. I'm closing the door over the switch, etc. Shlomo Zalman is ruling, no, this is the Maisa. So now, when we're going to the next conversations, so the conversation starts about motion sensors. So for a lot of people who don't understand exactly how motion sensor is working, they felt, still, it's a digital switch. So what I'm doing here, I'm like, what am I doing? I'm pressing a button, and the button sending a message to the computer, to the microprocessor within the switch, and this is sending another message to somewhere else. And even if you remember, just a few years ago, there came out this kosher switch that people were trying to allowed to use a switch on Shabbos, turn on and off the electricity. I remember being there by Belskis kind of over that Tzadik the Woche. He said to me, "What are we talking about? It's like a Rube Goldberg kind of, you know what I mean? If you're doing the same thing, you just go around and like this, and then again, bottom line is the assault from Shlomo Zalman was that doing something that the bottom line will be turn on the fire, turn on the lights. This is your Maisa. So the same like Shlomo Zalman was a little bit hesitate in the first muscle rishon of Shlomo Zalman was a little bit hesitate on opening, closing the door on a switch. But Shlomo Zalman said, no, this is how it works. This is the machine. So you turn on the fire. So when it goes to a digital switch, which what happens is there's a microprocessor inside, it goes back and forth, and you turn on and off, etc. Okay, but bottom line, this is the process, this is the machinery, and that's what's going on over here, and that's it. It's your Maisa. Now, when it goes to motion sensors, we have to understand, it's so simple. Motion sensor means that when you walk by, you're pressing a button. It seems to be like, complicated or far away from me. It's wrong, it's simple. The same like we understand that the old-fashioned switch was putting together a circuit. So I did it physically at that time. I was turning the knob, circuit were closed. Or I was pushing the button, circuit was closed. Now I'm going forward and I'm walking by. By walking by, I'm putting together the same circuit. So electrons are flowing into. I'm just doing it not with a knob, not with a button. I'm doing it with my body by walking by. So I'm walking by. Okay. How about if I'm going to go to the switch, then I'm going to turn on the switch like this. Again, it could be shaloi kaderech. It could be a shinui somehow. So we're getting back to the conversation with Shlomo Zalman. So Shlomo Zalman says, hey, opening up a switch with closing the door, that's nicht. So Shlomo Zalman, no. If that's the way the machine is built, so this is the way of turning on this switch. So if that's the way the sensor is built, that's the way to turn on the sensor. So therefore, most of the poskim, especially the poskim who understand technology, understand simply that the motion sensor or any other type of sensors is considered to be a regular switch that the poskim already ruled back from Zalman and Bashpaisach, that this is considered to be a Maisa. There's a conversation about temperature sensors. Temperature sensors could be a little bit different because it's not so much you. It's you opening up the door. Whether it's your house, it's your fridge, it's your oven. So you're opening up the door and the temperature, the change of the room temperature to the other side temperature, from the room temperature to the oven temperature, or from the outside temperature to your room temperature, whatever you do, the change. So this is where, there's a little bit of conversation, the poskim, we're not going to get into it now. But in general, what I'm trying to get is to a position where we all understand that even certain things are like this is not more than Rube Goldberg. Meaning, the fact that I'm the one just putting the circuit together in the old switch, or I'm the one closing the door on the fridge, or I'm the one just pressing the button which sends the message to the microprocessor and then to the computer and then to the light to turn on, or I'm even the one just walking by and therefore kind of pressing a button, motion sensor, and something is turned on. This is all considered a Maisa. This is all considered my action. This is all considered that I'm doing it. Okay. Any questions so far? Let's have some chats here. Let's see if we can chat a little bit. Oh, okay, fine. Nothing for us. So, so once we understand that, I think that this is where we're getting now. This is where we're getting now to the conversation we want to talk about today. So we all understand that once we're doing something with our hands, and the hands, it could be a switch, it could be whatever we discuss, a motion sensor, all of that, the body, whatever we're doing, it's all considered our minds. Here's a question that we're talking today. What about speaking? So the same thing today can happen. Everything that I described before, the switches are the same, the electronic are the same, the digital is the same, everything is fine and beautiful. But I'm not doing it anymore with my hands. I'm not pressing a button. I'm not turning a knob. I'm not walking by. It's not my body. It's a new concept. The concept is dibu. The concept is my speaking. When I'm speaking to something and something is happening, you're speaking to your phone. Your phone is dialing for you. You're speaking to your echo machine and ordering something for you, turning on the lights for you. Is it considered an action? Are you doing it something? Is dibur a maisa or dibur not a maisa? This is the question we have today. And before we go into the action of maisa, I just want to share with you an interesting chidah. The chidah in Parshas Beshalach, in the Parsha of the month, is unbelievable. The chidah in Parshas Beshalach is dealing with a very interesting question. And he's dealing with, how about cooking on Shabbos with your mind? Cooking on Shabbos with your mind. If we have some professionals over here, I see some doctors or whatever it is, it's not so far anymore. You have MRI today, you're reading the brain signals, we just got Google glasses, you can read your eye movements. We're not so far from such a technology that you can sit down in your house and just think about what type of supper would you like to have today, and things will happen. Or just think about what you're missing in your pantry and things will be ordered from Amazon. I don't think it's too far. But surprisingly, it was already done many years ago. Many years ago. When we were still in the desert, right? We were cooking our food with our mind. That was the story with the man. The man was coming down in the desert in the Midbar, and everyone was able to think about what he wants the man to look like, what you want the mon to be cooked like, whether you want it to be fried, you want it to be cooked, medium, raw, whatever you want. You were able to think about it and it happens. Now the question is, the chakira is, what happened at the time of the mon? When I said I wanted to be cooked, it means it was a raw piece, but it was just cooked. It was taste like cooked. Or it were actually cooked. When a person says, I was thinking about, I want to get my piece of mon, I want it to be fried. Was it only tasted like fried, or was it actually fried? So we have in the Mechilte, in Parshas Beshalach, one of the Midrashim, we have a Machloikes Tanoim. We have a Machloikes Tanoim, whether when a person were thinking about the mon, whether it was just tasted like cooked, or was actually cooked. And the Torah says, "Et asher toichlu oichli, evashel bashelu." The Torah says, "Don't cook it on Shabbos. Do it before Shabbos." The Torah says, "Don't do it on Shabbos. Prepare everything before Shabbos." Says the Chidah. So maybe we see over here that the cook b'machshava, to think about it, is considered a ma'aser. And therefore, the Torah says, don't do it on Shabbos. Beautiful piece of Chidah. He goes in more than that. There's a piece of Kiles Yankim, and the Kiles Yankim is discussing it in the same place. Kiles Yankim is talking about cooking with a zgula, cooking with a kishuf. So this is the conversation. Again, it could be more divrei agoda. It's maybe not something that we're going to paskin out of it. But I'm saying, I just want to say, if there's any science or new invention they're going to come out in these earlier, and I'm expecting it to happen, not a long time, we are prepared. We have sources. We have discussions, and already in our Tanoim, and Amorim, and Rishonim, and Achronim, already talking about everything, even to cook with your mind. So going back to speech, this is our question now. So this is now already very popular. Also something that, 10 years ago, you could have speak to someone and say, hey, soon you'll be able to talk to a machine. It will be a chiddush. And it's still kind of a chiddush. But it's popular enough for us to address. You have to understand. So we are doing stuff by voice command. So again, we'll have to deal with it the same way. First of all, we have to understand what to be doing. And today's day could be everything. You can turn on your fire and your gas range with your voice command. You can turn on your car with your voice command. You can turn on your computer. You can order things online. You can get an Uber driver to your door. So the results is already done. We all know what we are doing. The question is, are we doing it? Halachically, is that considered that we are doing it? Because we're just speaking. We're only speaking. So speaking is an action or not? So we know that action doing, if we're doing something with our hands, with our body, and we're going back and forth, all the switches that, all things that we discussed, we already covered. As long as you're doing it with a body that's already made, it's a ma'aser. But now the question is the voice command. Voice command. So if you covered a little bit the Ma'ar Mekoimes, so there's a lot of Ma'ar Mekoimes talking about Nezikim, talking about your blowing with your mouth and you're being mazik, talking about the Bishul Akum. If you're blowing with your mouth and you turn the fire on, it's considered a ma'aser or not. When over here, Hilchos Nida, you're talking about whether it's considered touching your wife or not when you're doing it, when you're blowing it. And even Shabbos, we find a little bit when you're blowing with your mouth, when it comes to Makabeh Patish, when it comes to Tiltul Miktzah. This is all the Ma'ar Mekoimes that hopefully you guys were covering before we came on over here. But what I'm trying to distinguish over here is that this is not the case we're talking about. So when you're blowing with your mouth, you're blowing. So what's coming out from your mouth is what? Is your body. We just learned in the Shabbos, right? So when you're blowing out, it's like your hand. What's the difference? It's a power that coming out from your body. So that's all, we can understand it very, very clear. Same like I'm touching with my mouth. How about let's take that a very simple example today, okay? So let's say I have a very soft sensor, or I have a very soft switch, okay? So I'm turning the switch by pressing the button with my hand. How about I'm getting close to the switch and I'm like, so you see them coming out of my mouth and it turns on the light. Everyone understands. Of course, it's my mice. What's the difference? What's the difference whether I'm doing it with pressing my hand or with my elbow, or if I'm blowing strongly on the switch? What's the difference? There's no difference. Simple. Now, someone can say, maybe it's not the derech. It could be considered a shinui. Okay, I can take it. It's probably not the derech. And like we mentioned over here in Hilchos Muktzah, the Maharil in Hilchos Muktzah says, to blow something on Shabbos, which you're not allowed to be metaltal, it's allowed. Why? Because it's kalach hayad. That's not the way to do it. Okay, meaning it's your action. You're doing it. It's just not a derech. It's not a normal thing to do. Like someone told me once, I was in country together, and he says to me, and I think you're right. He says, how about you sitting in country under the tree? And the meaning is that you're getting all these cockroaches, all types of stuff on your head and on your shoulders, and then you're blowing them. And he said, on your hand, Shabbos. He said that might be prohibited because this is a derech, right? So the Maharil is talking about moving an object from one place to the other. Okay, so usually moving it with the hand. Okay, and blowing it is not kederech. But when you have a cockroach on your hand, the only way is to do it like this. It's going to be the derech. Believe it or not, I found a Pri Megadim. Pri Megadim in Hilchos Muktzah is talking about and says yes. In a case where it's a derech, it's a tiltul muktzah. So the idea is that no one says that blowing is not your action. Or is your action. It's just that most of the cases, it's not the derech, it's not the way to do it. And if it's not the way to do it, it's a shinui. And if it's a shinui, B'melacha d'oraisa is it still going to be Yisod Rabbanon, and B'muktzah, some type of a shinui could be considered an heter or whatever, to be good for it. We're not going to get into it. But we see very clearly that it's considered your action. Okay, so we understand that. But this is not what we are talking about. We are not talking about blowing. You're giving out a power out of your body. We're not talking about that. We're talking about sitting on a chair, very relaxing, and just talking to your echo machine. Alexa, please order me Uber. Where's the action? It's not your hand. It's not your body that's doing something. Nothing. It's not an action. Who said this is considered to be an action? Anything we're talking about sisa tzunaf, talking about nipuach bepeh, amenapeach beklei zchuchis. This is, we totally agree, it's a maise. But who said it's speaking? Speaking. Calmly, quietly, with no effort, with no power. Who said this is considered to be a mice? So some of the poskim, I think it was Rav Yosef, some other poskim, we're talking about when when the new phone came out, you're able to speak to your phone and dial. So they came over, I think it was a tzal in Eretz Yisrael, they came over to HaRav Yosef, asking if it's going to be easier. Meaning, maybe they should use the voice command instead of actually dialing the numbers on the phone, because maybe voice command will not consider the Maisa. So HaRav Yosef goes and says, maybe it's not the derech. So I guess it was in the very beginning. But you take from the answer of HaRav Yosef, you can understand that if that's going to become normal, if that's not going to be a shinui, he understands it's an action. He understands it's an action, even though you're just speaking to the phone. But the truth is, that's the question. This is our question. So I found out on the Nezer, the Tshuva on the Nezer, very interesting Tshuva on the Nezer. And Avnei Nezer says, someone asked the Avnei Nezer a major question. The guy came to the Avnei Nezer and said, I don't understand. The Gemara is talking about a mechaber and mavir. The Gemara is talking about turning a fire or distinguish a fire with blowing. You're blowing with your mouth. The Gemara says you have chatas. But then says the Gemara in Perek Meshech, we're going to see it in Daf Yomi about 2 weeks from now. The Gemara asks a question about mechaber. Mechaber means that you make the animals to go. So you speak to the animals. Right? If let's say you ever saw a cat, walking near you, or a dog knocking near you, and has some ring on their neck, and you're chasing them out, you might be over Meleches Mechaber, because you made an animal walking in Eretz Yisrael. So the concept is Mechaber. So how you make this melacha? With the dibur. You're talking to the animals. You're chasing the animal. Hey, come on, get out of here. Right, that's what you're doing. So the Gemara says over there in Shabbos that this is not considered a Maisa. Why is it not considered a Maisa? Says Rashi, because it's Mechamer Bekol. It's your voice command. Rashi is talking about voice command. And the Gemara says voice command is not a Maisa. There's a chidush in Mechamer. The Mechaber is chayev, even though it's not a Maisa, it's only a dibur. It's a chidush only in Mechaber. That's a chidush in Mechaber. It comes out of it that if you do any other dibur, another malacha, you're not going to be chayev. So the shor that came to the Avnei Nezer and says, Avnei Nezer, my Rebbe Leib, if you're blowing into a fire, you're distinguishing the fire, why is it your Maisa? You're just blowing. Dibur is not a Maisa. So the Avnei Nezer says over here, that's a question. And the guy was even wondering to the Avnei Nezer there, I didn't find any sefer to ask the question. Says the Avnei Nezer, Chaz v'sholom, shots on a maratz's question to ask. What are we talking about? What are you comparing these two things one to the other? And says the Avnei Nezer over here is shibush godol. You don't understand the difference. What's the difference? It says poal akibui va'ever she'emase. When he was distinguishing the fire with blowing, he did the ma'ase akibui. But b'mechamer shabeheima osta melocha v'yipoal rakes hakoil, you only did his voice. Okay. So I had an argument with a big Talmid Chacham in Monsey. What's the pshat in this Avnei Nezer? So the Avnei Nezer says like this: don't compare these two things. When you are being mechaber and mavir with blowing on the fire, it's your maisa. When you're just speaking to the animal, it's not your maisa. So we can understand these Avnei Nezer in two ways. One way we can say, simple. There's a fire over here, right? I'm blowing the fire. That's it. It's my maisa. Okay? Now, when I'm talking to the animal, talking to the cat, hey, come on, come here. I'm not doing anything. I'm just causing for the behemoth, for the animal to walk. It could be one pshat in Amnenezer. The other pshat in Amnenezer could be there is blowing and there is talking. Blowing is your ma'aser, your action, it's your hand, it's your power out of your body, like I said before. But speaking is not. Speaking is just wording. Okay? So, what's the pshat in the Amnenezer exactly? We can argue. Whether the point is that here I'm doing my ma'aser and over there the animal is doing the ma'aser, or the difference is between blowing and speaking. So if that's the pshat in Amnenezer or not, we can argue. But I still believe that there is a big difference when we're considering action, whether we're talking about blowing or we're talking about speaking. So from the fact that we have kibur in avoro, in nipuach, and in bishul akum, in nida, and all the places we're talking about blowing, this is not going to be enough for us when we're talking about voice command. When we're talking about just speaking. Right?
HaRav, the counter to that is that when you're talking, at the end of the day, what happens is you're creating sound waves. So as you said so eloquently in your introductions in the technology, like electricity, you can create things in all sorts of different ways. So who says creating by blowing, which l'chayra is the application of air, is different than talking, which is air creating sound waves? That's a shaila.
Great question. Great question. So I was about to get there. So what I'm trying to get is this, exactly this point. Now, the same like we said before, when we were jumping from the old switch, knob, or whatever you call it, to a motion sensor, right? So people were under the impression is that we're not really doing anything, we're just walking by. So we understand before that this is wrong. The same like we are pressing a button, the same like we're turning on the knob, the fire, and then away, we're just walking by the motion sensor. It means that there is waves in front of the sensor, that once we are walking by, it's basically we are pushing the button. And we understand before that this is considered a ma'aser. So the same thing exactly, Rabbi Gottesman is perfectly right, is by, let's just understand a little bit. What's the difference whether we are blowing heavy air to the sensor, to the button, or we are just moving some sounds in the air, which is enough for the sensor to basically, like pressing a button, right? What happened in the sensor? The sensor is just enough sensitive to recognize these waves. So the same like when I'm blowing to the switch, I'm blowing very strong, so the the piece of plastic is moving. When it comes to a sensor, it's the same thing. It's the sensor that's so sensitive, so my sound waves are pushing this button. Exactly. That's what we have to understand today. But I think we can still argue whether this is a ma'aser or not. Because again, going back to the switch, it was my body that moving and doing it. By now, I'm sitting, I'm not doing anything. Okay, so there's wave sounds, sound wave that's going, flowing and getting to the sensor. It could be that it's a ma'aser, it could be that not. What I want to share with you is that, and again, I think we're going to finish with this. It's something that I really didn't find, so much of conversation going about it. And logically, I'm with you, Rabbi Gottesman, that it just looks like a different, but they're basically the same thing, because what's different, blowing air or spreading sound waves in the air? I understand that, but still, it's beautiful that I found the machlokes achronim. And again, this machlokes achronim is, before technology and sound waves were around b'chlal, but it was something about lechisha. And again, you guys, I was watching that you covered these two ma'amukomis over here. But we find over here an halacha in Hilchos refuah, Semeshinkov Chesif Memhei. Lo yichashim al nechoshim v'akrabim. They had a way at that time somehow that you can give a lachash. You're speaking somehow to the snake. Don't ask me how you do it, but they had a way to do it. And you're keeping them. They're not walking. They're not going anywhere. You are doing meleches tzeder. So the result is clear. You're doing now meleches tzeder. You're taking the snake and catching them. You can't move anywhere. Okay? But you're doing it with your sound. You're just speaking to them. You're just being lachash. Okay? And we find over here a nice machlokes between the Pri Megadim and the HaRav. The HaRav is considered to get a maise, and the Pri Megadim over here, this beautiful language over here, and it says, Ibli maise rak bepeh. Like that. So again, we're not going to paskin out of it, because logically, I agree with Rabbi Gotzman, and this is actually the psak from Rabbi Yashiv, that we're saying that if that's going to become the norm to speak to the phone, so it's the same like doing a maise. But for the lomdish part of it, I think it's a beautiful source over here, discussing the concept whether speaking, belachash, again, not blowing. See, the Pri Megadim didn't compare anything about all these ma'amukomis we had before. It didn't compare to Bishlakim, it didn't compare to Migmoy Nizokim, we didn't compare to Nipuach Bekli, to Titul Mikze, all of this famous stuff in the Halacha, which is very famous, not like anywhere. No, he's talking about, what the language over here, Ibli Maserak Bepeh, like goes. No chiddush. I think the Pri Megadim is at least telling us that there's a difference in level. Okay, so we still have the HaRav, and the Mishnah Berurah sounds to pass on the HaRav. So it seems like lemaise speaking to something is considered a maise. So lemaise, Rabbi Gutzman, you're going to be right anyway. But for the lomdish boy, for the conversation is beautiful over here, and people can still tell me. And I had it once when I gave the shiur somewhere else, that some people came over and says, you know what? With your logic, it might be a difference between a lachash and speaking. Lachash is listening to the sound itself. It's doing something. So we can continue about it. And I believe there's no difference. Because once you understand how things works, it's really not different. It's air. And it's waves in the air, and it's all the same. Basically, the only difference is about the receiver. If the receiver is sensitive enough to receive it or not. The physical switch needs a serious blow to turn on, and some sensors are enough just to get a wave. So it's really not a different logically.
Let's ask Lamaisa, Yeridea. You can create Bishul Akum by saying turn on the switch from across the world?
So again, that's a little bit of a different.
Avek from the Mariel. The Mariel is, right. as you said correctly, is neficha, talking.
Right. So without getting to the conversation whether the person has to be on the spot in order to create a bishul akum and not over the world, from the action shaboy, I don't see any difference between blowing or speaking to the machine or.
So Lamai said, OU policy is to allow Bishul Yisrael by speaking. Turn on the fire?
I don't think it's the mice yet, but I know there's a conversation about it. I know Belsky wasn't such a fan of it, but
I think Rebelsky discusses it, Lamaisa, if I remember correctly, when we learned Bishul Akum. And he held like you.
But I don't think they're practically doing it. They're doing it by computer, not yet by Dibu.
By computer. So computers are Maisa B'dayim clearly. Right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But I think halachically, again, there's no difference. If that's the machine, that's the way it works. And it's all the difference is whether the receiver is different or not. So
let's ask now like this. A chayla. okay, where you want to try to get you want to try to get grummas in, running a hospital. Is there any value through voice? And is there a difference now that voice recognition goes up to a cloud and it's stored there? Does somehow that make it a grumma? I love after HaRav has answers to all these questions. I'm just putting the questions on the table, and the reason we have these questions is because we discussed them a couple of years ago, and many of the island was there. Is somehow this requires a good knowledge of how cloud technology works. Some of the fact that it's stored and it only comes down later, does that create some sort of a grumma? Am I helping here in a case where I need a grumma? Something like that? Or is it clearly under all circumstances my day?
Right, so the question I was mentioning before to the Rav Elyashiv, that was exactly the question. So Bitzvik Zilberstein is asking this question to his Shver, Rav Elyashiv. And the question came from Atzola, whether there is a mile to use a voice command or not. So the answer for Rav Elyashiv was, and it goes along with what we said today, he said if it's not normal yet, then there's a mile. That was his answer, meaning
because it's a shinui, not because it's grammar.
Exactly. He was considering it a maisi, he was considering it a peula, he was just said maybe it's a shinui. So I think clearly today, once we are, we're pretty, living with this voice command and all of that, I think Rav Elyashiv today will say it's a maisi, and I think that's the way it comes out for us in halacha. So it could be a lekula in Hilchos Bishlakim, but it's going to be lechuma in Hilchos Shabbos. Once these things is happening normally in a normal digital time fashion, it's going to be considered a maisa and not a gom.
So there is not going into time delay in the issue, because even if it's time delayed, it's the maisa. It's still a maisa b'daim, and there's no grum. Okay, if you don't mind, I just want to, before you finish, I just want to see.
Someone is going to 1 second. If someone is going to implement a delay into the system specifically for Shabbos, this is something which, again, still an argument in the poskim, but that, could have got, into the category of groma. But if that's the way the machine works, and again, this thing goes in seconds, milliseconds, it's a mice.